Okay, thank you very much for meeting us today, Tony.
Delighted to be with you, Keith. Thank you very much, Bridget, for coming, and Michael.
Can you tell us a bit about the early days of the business, the establishment in Waterford, and how it played a part in the community?
Yeah. Well, I suppose back in those days, and you're back in the 60s, in the early 60s, and I went into the business because Denny's realised that they wouldn't prosper with me as their chief office boy, you know. So I got into the business with my father because Denny's were leaving off a lot of staff. It was another recessionary time. And John Street was the venue, and that was where we started our business. My father started his business, had been in the trade all the years, and at the age of 45 opened a business in John Street, which prospered and did very well. And we bought the shop opposite that, so Walton's was the shop at the time. And John Street was a buzz of a street at that time. It was like an Italian village, people all over the place. Heary's was the grocery shop. Everybody went in for their rashers, not their bacon, it was rashers then, the Denny sausages, and queues at the till. Very busy, and the town, at that part of the town, very busy. Even better down here in Barnstrand Street was busier again, but there was a huge influx. So all the supermarkets that you've got on the periphery of town were now condensed into the centre of the city, and the city progressed. Markup would have been horrendously small. So whereas there was prosperity, there wasn't a lot of it. You got the minimum car. The car owners weren't princes of merchants. Merchant princes is the word. I'll give you that word again. They weren't merchant princes. So everybody strived their way of their family. A lot of them were their families over the businesses, and that's all gone now because I suppose there's fire regulations that forbid people actually living overhead. But anyway, John Street, the factories are hugely. Denny's would have employed 800 people, Clover Meats over 1,000, Glass Factory 4,000, hugely involved in quantities of paper mills over 1,000, one of the biggest mills, certainly the biggest mills in the south of, in Ireland, and north of Ireland was bigger again. But all progressive, all very labour intensive, all lots of jobs, everybody cycling to work, everybody cycling home from work. Cars weren't in abundance like you see now. In Ferrybank they built a road up the centre of Ferrybank of Rockingham, and they knew that there would never be anybody parked 2 rows of cars up it. You couldn't get up it now because they knew that people wouldn't have cars. They didn't build in that factor. So now everybody has a car in every house, and you physically can't drive up. And if somebody comes in at the top, you can't drive up it because nobody could plan that far ahead and see that the country would progress to such a stage. In that time, I would have been involved in Vincent de Paul, and I'm back again now after years, and I've been in it. And you see the difference of poverty, real poverty. People saying that they hadn't screed on the floor. A screed means that the concrete on the floor didn't get to the stage of a finished concrete. And there are poor houses. Now there's probably a lot of single mothers and single fathers, and that's where the poverty is. But protected by the state, and that's not political. I'm not saying this in favour of anybody, but they are protected. People won't starve. I've seen people in Madrid hungry on the streets, dying. And that was a few years ago. I don't know whether that's improved since. But in Waterford, people protected themselves. There was always somebody else out there to help. So truly, there wasn't people sleeping out like you would see in London. John Street, Michael Street, slightly upmarket from John Street, only slightly. You got more upmarket as you came down street, and downtown was where the business really was. This is the centre of town, and I knew that I had to be out because John Street was weakening and deteriorating a bit. It actually not deteriorating as much as turning to food. It was a centre of food and probably pubs and pizzas. So I knew the place was downtown, and we bought this shop that I'm in now for 100,000, which would have been a lot of money at the time, but good bankers, people that always facilitated us. And I can say the Bank of Ireland were instrumental in that and very helpful, and they loaned us money when I would have been quite a young guy. My dad died when I was 29 and I took over the business and loved it and enjoyed every minute of it, worked very hard. I wasn't interested in pints out, or I wasn't interested in horses, and I still can't play poker because all belonged to me. I did all those things, and it wasn't beneficial, I can assure you. So I was into sport more than anything else, squash and things like that. there was a great liveliness about the town, and that waned over the past 6, 7 years due to recession. And you see probably a quietness, and I think it's coming back well now. We've fallen in figures now for 7 years, and I work with 50 staff. We've increased our premises from 5 shops to 9 shops now. And this is the wrong time to do that sort of thing. But I think the future is in Waterford. I think we need to get more industry. I know we will get more industry. We're starting to see little bits of it. It's kind of, the old indigenous businesses are gone. The Clover Meats, all these, they were dirty old businesses. People were tired of working in slop and guts and, excuse the phraseology, but cleaning out cattle, emptying their carcasses. And I saw all this being in the bacon industry. And there were monotonous kind of businesses in production. And there was a little bit of dissension, and people after 40 years had had enough of it and were willing to get out. And I suppose those businesses, because I believe all sorts of industry have a time, they have a lifetime, and that moves on and it moves back and it changes. And no matter what it is, I feel, I mean, we're seeing a digital IT phenomenon now that we think will go on forever, but I think everything has its time. Like real production of food now has gone out to Dawn Meats very, very successfully. But there's a huge amount of people who are not prepared to work in that sloppy business. So they're coming in from other countries. And it's good that we get these people, that we get them in, and we get, like, I'll give you the skill set, and our business has changed. Like, we would have old tailors and cantankerous old tailors who are very difficult and would be out drinking on a Friday night. 1 second, I get that phone out of the way. But would be sort of contrary. Now there's an influx of, whereas we would have had good female tailoresses, always very easy, very nice to deal with. But there's an influx of Polish tailoresses, and we have a Ukrainian tailoress. Her ability is unbelievable, but they're trained to a skill level that tailoresses were never trained to in this country. So they can whip out a shoulder off a suit, trim off it, and make it perfect. Match the patterns perfectly if you do an alteration. So the skill set is very high and very good for us. It sets standards higher than we've been used to before. Also, I've traded all my business out of Germany for 40 years. Germany, Italy, and France. Like Vestre of Paris let go 8,000 people back in the 80s. Just the whole thing had changed. They were going to Kosovo, they were going to probably North African countries. All these people are hugely skilled people. Because the businesses for females is not there, they don't get the opportunity that they would get for other jobs in Ireland and England and in Northern Europe. So there was very few skills that they could do, and one was tailoring. So all these Germans, all the Italians, the French, and McGee's of Donegal were the last to go out. And they brought all their businesses out. They sent their expertise out, they created their factories out there, and they got the local labour, which was highly skilled, but weren't used to cutting by lasers. They cut by laser machine, and they cut the clothing so that the tailoring is superb. In the old days, there was a saying, there was no such thing as a cheap steak or a cheap suit. That doesn't manifest itself anymore now because everything is so skilled with less expensive labour, but with very skilled factories, with the top people coming out of all these countries, including Ireland. There's not a suit now made in Ireland. There's not a suit made in England except at Savile Row, and that's hand-tailored. And I would put up a laser-cut suit out of Italy against any suit you would get out of Savile Row. So in actual fact, in Leeds, they would have had 15,000 people working in clothing business, making suits and making. And that's totally gone over 20 years. So the whole world has changed in clothing business. There's no point in making a good suit or making a suit with a rubbishy cloth. So the cloths, all the cloths have improved, the skills have improved, the linings have improved. So everything is better now and more reasonable. It's not like the cheap steak. You couldn't get a cheap steak. Now you can get a very reasonable steak. Now you can get a very reasonable suit. Highly skilled, highly finished, unbelievably finished at very sensible prices. So the whole world has come to reality that It doesn't have to be a designer brand.
Coming back to suits in Waterford and
Yes.
tailoring the Waterford back when you moved from John Street down to here, what kind of styles and trends or what kind of people did you
Well,
see?
the trend was everything was made to measure. Everybody went to mass on a Sunday. Everybody wore a suit on a Sunday. Everybody wore a waistcoat underneath or more a sweater underneath. They wore an overcoat after it. We'd come out of a time of TB, tuberculosis. It was rampant within the country. And everybody had to wrap up for the fear that you might get this disease because there was very little cure for it. There is a cure for TB now. But at that time, there was people dying, families would die off. So everything was about wrapping up, about thickness, about weight. An overcoat, you wouldn't be able to walk 4 miles in an overcoat. You'd fall down at the weight of it. Double-breasted, heavy, crumbies. All that's gone out of fashion. Clothing is much lighter. We used to do at least 27 suits made to measure at that time. Everybody wore suits. Everybody who went anywhere wore suits. If they went out for the night, they wore a suit. If they went to work, they wore a suit. Everybody wore suits. And it went to mass on Sundays, I say, they wore a suit. And that's all gone out the window. I mean, recently at the G7, not the G8, because Putin is not allowed in, all the guys turned up. Putin turned up without a tie. Cameron turned up without a tie. Orlon turned up without a tie. So it was, and they all wore blue suits. It looked like a uniform because it's the colour of Europe is this blue at the moment. It was navy before, it was grey before that, but the trend has changed and colour has come into it. Like I'm selling pink and red trousers for men that I wouldn't have sold 4 years ago. So we've become extremely European and very discerning because money doesn't come so easy in Ireland. Maybe the Scandinavians have more, maybe the Norwegians have more because they have oil. Maybe the Germans have, but the discerning and the choice is very fussy here now. It's become very, and it should be so. So people are very discerning. They look for nice trims on shirts, and they're looking for more detail. And a lot more going into fashion now. A lot more getting into things fitting neatly. The big floppy trousers is not accepted. The baggy bum in the trousers. The American arse I always think the Americans could put people on the moon, but they couldn't put an arse in the trousers. You know? But that's all gone. Everything's Scandinavian, and I think we're up there with them. I remember being in Crete quite a few years ago, and a flight coming in from Manchester, and the flight had come in from Dublin, and they came in off the apron, and I was up on the top looking. The Dublin flight was way, way better dressed than the Manchester flight. You know? Now, people dress down on holidays, so you make allowance for that.
You mentioned that you started off in the Denny's.
In Denny's, I was a very junior clerk, and that's where when you got into Denny's bacon factory, you started at the bottom, and I started as office boy. So I came up through that.
What would the environment have been like to work in? What kind of work would you have had to do?
Yeah, well, very, very strict. It was a British ascendancy factory, very unbelievably frugal in their attention to not wasting anything. Like an animal came in from the eyes to the horn to the bone to the skin to the leather, everything was used. The entrails were used for blood and bone manure. So there was all departments, so highly efficient. And even though that would have been back in '65, the quality of what they produced was excellent. When they sent out the contracts out to France of lamb, they were covered in white muslin. There wouldn't be a spot of blood on any carcass going. Absolute pristine. So you think we've just arrived now? We haven't arrived. We've been there back in the '60s. Like when export was done and export for the American forces contracts, everything would have been checked by vets, high standards, and very, very poor working conditions with very poor wages, and health and safety would have gone out the window.
What were the working conditions like?
Well, wet. There was always water around you. Now, if you go in a February morning, on a Monday morning, and you had to be in at 7 o'clock because now you were going to kill an animal, cut it, drain its intestines, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't conducive to wanting to do it for the next 40 years. So it would have been a tough job. In the boning room, they'd be boning meat off bones all day, standing in the one position in clogs, most demeaning. But I mean, your feet were going to be frozen if you didn't. Wooden clogs, so aprons and wets, and you stood there all day and they just boned meat off, and that was meat that was for mincemeat. And there would have been 60 people working in that department. Then there's the sausage room, where girls worked in the sausage room, maybe 280, and using skins, machines pushing through meat into a skin machine and tying off sausages all day long. So it wasn't the most, it wouldn't be an exciting job. They had music in the background, but tough job relative to the way industry is today. It's much nicer to sit at a computer if you get the qualification and press the buttons. So
I suppose there's a kind of a little bit of a rounding up as well. What would the city centre down the town, what would that area have been like?
Packed. Absolutely packed of a Saturday. All the guys came down because they wanted to meet the girls. This place was outside Penny's, then Woolworths. It was kind of a meeting place, and there's jokes, and the 16 and 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. They got out in their finery, you know. Nobody in denims then. They were in chinos, or they were in a decent pair of slacks and a nice sweater. People dressed better then, you know, but it's a lot more casual world now. But I remember being in the States 40 years ago, and I saw all this coming, and I thought, gee, we'll never get into denims, and you'll never get somebody at the counter of a supermarket with their curlers in and the dressing gown on them. That hasn't happened here yet, thank God, you know. But Waterford would have been busy. Saturday, this was all a drive-through area at the time, and cars would be, not in abundance, but there'd be plenty of them. Town, I mean, all the shopping was focused on the centre of Waterford, in the centre of Waterford here. So in other words, all that business that's outside was condensed in, so it had to be busy. You know, it was a nightmare for parking, but then there weren't that many cars either. You know, there wasn't the huge number of vehicles on the road that there are now. So there was a necessity for more car parking, but not as dire as it is now, you know. But I think Waterford and through the corporation have made huge advances, particularly at the back of Waterford Crystal is a magnificent car park. And you see, I think, not like Dublin, Waterford is badly trained. People want to park still at the door, still within our mind that we should be able to park 50 yards away from where you want to get your purchase. But I think there's great strides coming through from City Hall as to improving car parking. Heretofore that was totally neglected and not even thought about. But then the pressure is on for more parking all the time.
And as a kind of a little kind of wrap up as well, just going back to the fashion and changing in styles, can you remember any particular standout styles? Or
Yeah, I do. I remember really well. Yeah, the time was Carnaby Street, and Carnaby was the place in London that set the trends, and London was the centre. Now it shifted afterwards to Germany and Italy, but England was back in the late 50s, 60s. England is what you copied. There's yeah, and we bought in stuff, but we paid 33 1/3% import duty. There was import duty at the time, so every item coming in from England had an imposition of 33% on it. Now we have VAT at 25%, so 23% now, but it wasn't as bad. So all the goods coming in, if you wanted style, it is going to cost. But I mean, anything that you see now has happened before. It went from wide lapels. It can only go around the block and come around, and it comes back to. I mean, at the moment the style is very narrow knee thighs, very narrow ends on trousers. All that's happened before. I've seen it now for the third time in my life. You know, this is 3 cycles of it, and lapels have gone neater and narrower. Checks are back. Everything evolves, but it evolves back to where it came from originally. So I see things that the lads would not have seen before, and they say, wow, isn't this new? It's not new to me because if I'm a dinosaur, I've seen it 3 times already, through 3 recessions incidentally. There's always a rumour within our business that Fitzgerald's will be going broke. When you see big people like Best's go under with something like 26 shops, we say, well, where do we stand in all of this? Well, through the recession, we've increased our shops. And I think with the power of good people working with us, it's held us together. And we believe in purchasing, trying to purchase premises, not rent premises. I think it's detrimental in the long run to be paying out lots of money, paying out 5,000 and 6,000 rent for a premises, and that going on forever really ultimately catches a company. They really can't afford it. So whatever the hit is and the take is, and the consequences of it, it's much better to be purchasing property. If there is a message I could give to anybody getting into business, is to try and purchase rather than rent.
Do you remember the 50 shilling?
Yes, I do. Across the road from us here, 50 shilling tailor it was called, you know, and 50 shillings. I don't know what to translate into euros now, but it was funny. Big English companies came in here, and like Best's are Irish now. There was Burton's, which was all over Ireland in the bigger cities, and they did very low stocking and did made to measure, and would have been really not that great a quality, but they presented very well in the windows. They did great display and the model that was in the window wasn't the suit. There was a makeup specially for the window only. It wouldn't fit anybody, but and then Hips were another company. And funny, the English companies didn't prosper because I think they tried to take too much out of it. If they'd been a bit more giving, and there was never a little bit of discount for anybody. So 50 shilling tailors would have been similar in that situation. There were companies that kind of had really not the feel for the pulse of where Ireland would be, but thought whatever they put in the high street in England, they could produce over here. And that really didn't work for them very well. So in actual fact, I wouldn't think there's an English men's clothing business other than Debenhams here now. You know. But in that time, there was lots of men's shops in Waterford, individually owned shops. And there's only, I suppose, back from the 50s, there's only USA bargain stores and ourselves left. They all went out of business through selling their purchases, through their kids not being interested in the business. So in our business now, I've got 2 daughters working in the business. We lost our son tragically back 7 years ago. He ran Heroes. So I have a grandson there, and he's as young as you are. He's 23, and he's part of our future too, you know. So we hope our family business will go on. This business has been with us now for just near 60 years. And maybe in Waterford 60 years isn't a long time, but seeing it through 3 recessions has been successful. And I know we'll come out of this one because we're 2.5 years away from owning lots of our premises. You know, our mortgages run out then. We'll have paid off all our mortgages by then. So we've got to hang on with our fingernails for 2.5 years more, and we'll. But the one message I would say is buy and purchase rather than rent if you can. So is that all you want to say to me?
Thank you very much.
Not at all. I don't know what's useful to you there and what's not.